Sure. Hi, everybody, and thanks, Jeff, for the kind introduction, and thanks for having me in general. Super pumped to talk to you today about leading agile teams when you're actually not the boss. So I want to focus on the topic of lateral leadership today and how it can be applied primarily in agile environments, and we may discuss later down the road how it can be applied in different environments as well. Jeff already gave you quite some context about me, so I have quite a product background, and maybe you're aware of that already. Lateral leadership is something, it's kind of a new way of leading people, and basically product managers have been the early prototypes of this, anticipating this role pretty early on. So I was faced with that during the early days of my career already. And now, like a couple of years in, I decided to take a step back and conclude my findings and insights on this interesting leadership challenge product managers, but also other types of executives have to face and are facing these days. So let's hop right in. Today in this presentation, I want to share with you 3 key takeaways, which you hopefully can remember if I would ask you at the end of the presentation. So at first, I want to do a very brief check with you if you are already a lateral leader. That's a common theme I encountered when I dug a bit deeper into this topic. Not only were people not aware of the term lateral leadership and what it meant, but they were also not aware that they are actually already leading people in a lateral way, and of course building their relationships, especially in agile environments. Second, I want to point out which key skills oftentimes overlooked when agile teams are getting assembled and when they try to find their way of how to work together. Most of you are probably also not aware of that, of this one when you're working in agile environments yourself. And the third and very practical takeaway I want to share today is how you can, as a lateral leader, provide autonomy to your teams or to the teams you're working with without losing touch of the actual tasks and challenges they are facing. Okay. So at first, the key question for me is, of course, which I raise when I start talking to people about it is, do you already lead laterally? And I usually get 2 responses. The first one being, what is lateral leadership? And the second is, no, I don't. And of course, the first one I can oftentimes explain, resolve pretty quickly by explaining that it's about working together on eye level. But the second one, then people usually push back and they're like, no, we have very clear hierarchies in our company, in our organization. I don't lead laterally. I have a very explicit leadership position. And the small test I then put people in is that, okay, let's do a 3-step process here. The first is, how many people did you ask for something at work during the last week? And then they make a short virtual list in their head, coming up with, like, don't know, depending on the size of your organization, 20 people. And then I tell them, okay, now cross off everybody from this list whose vacation days you're personally approving. And surprisingly, not that surprisingly, is that only a few of these people get then crossed off from the list because we don't approve that many vacation days from people. And the end result is, guess what? Like, everybody remaining on this list is someone you are already in lateral leadership with, right? So that's oftentimes quite a revelation for most of the folks I talk to, because it's like, wow, that's quite an amount of people, and I have a leadership relationship with these people. I was like, yeah. So you have to figure things out, and you have to start looking at the relationship you're having with these people in a more structured way. Let's take one step back though to come up with a proper definition of, like, a proper visualization of what lateral leadership actually is, especially in contrast to classic hierarchical leadership. So what you usually observe in companies is that leadership is organized in a very hierarchical way, meaning someone at the top is the boss, and below this person are busy bees working in a team, and this is the perfect example for hierarchical leadership. Compared to that, it's much more common today in these days to find teams which operate completely on eye level, where everybody has its own domain of expertise, but still collaborates, but without the formal hierarchy. So especially in the context of agile product teams, you have a product manager and you have domain experts like an engineer, UX, or web analyst collaborating with this person in this team. And this is the perfect example for what lateral leadership actually is. It means essentially that you have to influence people without formal authority, right? So you have to get them on board. You have to follow them for your vision. Essentially, what I described in the beginning, you have to, if you want something from them, you have to get them on board, but without the formal authority. because if we switch one slide back, this is the biggest difference between these two leadership scenarios is that in the hierarchical leadership, it's oftentimes pretty explicit that the person at the top is leading the other people. Compared to on the lateral leadership side, it's a very implicit leadership position. For example, product people are just being put into, and maybe it's part of the job description to lead the team, but it's not an official title. So they are not officially entitled and don't have formal authority to lead other people. But what's actually the reason why lateral leadership becomes a thing right now? The thing is that we see Agile, which is one of the underlying mechanics lateral leadership is built upon, starts to grow out of the IT department where it originally came to life, right? Most of us probably know that. So in traditional companies, you oftentimes had to use the magnifier to find those agile Gallic villages being in one corner, organized and collaborating in an agile way. Compared to what I personally consider to be the very future of organizations is that you have many self-organized teams which are completely cross-functional and are only loosely connected to each other. And at the center, you may have the legal entity forming a company. But we will see this as the organizational structure of the future, having those loosely connected teams, which then, of course, without the need of hierarchical leadership, have to organize themselves and have to figure out how to lead each other. A quote from Bill Scott, who's a VP of product at PayPal, perfectly captures for me one of the problems I see when people and companies turn towards Agile for organize their main work. So what he originally meant when he said that Agile doesn't have a brain, he meant that Agile methodologies like Scrum or Kanban seem to free people from thinking about what they're actually doing and why they are building certain things. But I want to take this quote one step further of like, I think Agile principles have the tendency to free people from thinking about the personal interaction and the emotional intelligence which is needed to collaborate with each other. And this especially becomes even more important when you are in a lateral leadership position. Because when you're in hierarchical leadership, you can always fall back to your traditional tools, like a performance improvement plan or whatever. But in a lateral leadership relationship, you can't do that. So you really have to rely on your brain to define the relationship you have with your teammates. So Agile essentially requires a new type of leadership we have to adapt in order to succeed with the self-organization of the teams. And one thing I came up with when I thought about, okay, how to make this more practical is basically a two-piece puzzle, which I consider to be the lateral leadership skill puzzle. So on the one hand, you have the skill of alignment, which you will discuss in a second. And on the other hand, you have empathy, right? And most of the times I hear people talk about alignment, right? So people focus on alignment a lot, discuss it across its various levels, not deeply enough though, but we will touch on that in a second. So I want to spend the first few minutes of debating about the skill puzzle, talking about empathy. And I just outlined to you where empathy is already needed. It is because in Agile constellations of Agile teams, you're oftentimes a generalist working with pretty high-level cross-functional with domain experts. And this is one example, one visualization from an Agile classic product development team example. But this can perfectly be translated, to, for example, to a marketing team which consists of performance marketeers, content marketeers, brand marketeers. So you have this constellation. You found this constellation in multiple parts of the organization. But if we stay with this example for Agile product development, you have, for example, UX designer, you have an engineer, you have someone taking care of analytics. And these three people have incredible skill depth, right? So they really mastered their craft, they're onto something, and they really go deep on this topic. And what also is one more complication for this relationship here is that these people oftentimes report to people managers, which on the other hand are also pretty advanced on this particular skill, right? So they usually don't report to general managers, but they are reporting to domain experts themselves as well, which supports the pattern of them only following other domain experts. So when you try to build up empathy for these domain experts, of course, you don't have to become one yourself, but I really encourage everybody when you are in a general role like a product manager is oftentimes that you have to understand the pains. So you may have not such a depth skill level, but you have to really build up empathy for the pains which come up once you start reaching this deeper skill level. So, for example, on the engineering side, you would have to deal with style guides and patterns, with continuous deployments on the engineering, or on the analytics side, maybe with some ad blockers. So it's super important that you recognize these pains your peers are going through, so you can establish a more closer relationship. It's always important to keep in mind that it's not about stepping into the playing field of your peers. Thereby, you would only lose them and not gain more respect and more buy-in. It's super important that you demonstrate willingness to go practical. And the two key benefits for your lateral leadership, especially in the context of being a product manager, is that you get more recognition from your peers for your work, and that you show more recognition for their work. And ultimately, you get the ability to ask much better questions, which is, especially for product managers, a skill we're always aiming for. So what are some practical examples what you can do to build up this professional empathy for your peers? So of course, the easiest one is that you can start to read development or design blogs. You can read books. You can listen to podcasts. You go to conferences. I will later on also share some useful links for non-developers, non-designers of stuff to subscribe to. Something I really encourage everybody to do is to join internal communities of practice. This is super important because depending on the size of your organization, there's a high chance that, for example, the iOS developers or front-end devs have their own community of practice. And if you just attend those internal meetups, you really get a good sense for the pains and the challenges they're going through. And ultimately, to become very practical, you can definitely look up some courses on Treehouse or Udemy. And I encourage everybody to just build an Alexa skill, build your iOS app, bring it to the App Store, to go through as many pains as possible, to experience yourselves, so you can really demonstrate the practicality you're willing to apply, and which has a tremendous positive impact on your daily relationship with the peers from your development teams. So I hope you can remember the skill puzzle. And as I said in the beginning, it's a two-piece thing. So we now talked about empathy, and I now want to spend a minute to discuss the topic of alignment. What I usually try to segment alignment into is, when I start talking about this, I'm comparing it to a funnel, right? So this funnel, from my perspective, has a macro and a micro perspective. Sorry. So at the very top, you have the strategic alignment, obviously. In the middle, you have the process alignment, like debating responsibilities and individual roles of a person. And you have motivators, right, of the individual. And today, as I said, I want to become very practical. I want to share some hands-on thoughts and hands-on advice how you can approach the strategic alignment level within Agile teams, where everybody has a lateral relationship with each other. So a great tool I came across recently is the so-called mission briefing. It's like not a very original name, but let's roll with it. So the goal of the mission briefing is to provide individuals the freedom to adjust their daily actions while keeping it in line with the original big picture intent. Its goal is also to limit the direction for defining and communicating the intent you share with the team. And it's also important that it allows each level working on a thing, on the project, on the initiative, whatever it is, to define their own way of working it and to approach the goal, right? So this framework was originally coined by Stephen Bungay, who's a strategy consultant, and he picked up some original military strategies and really turned them into a practical framework for product development, for aligning the various levels being involved in a project. So the mission briefing consists of 5 very simple and boiled down chapters, so to say. On the first part, you have the context, setting the stage. You have the higher intent. You have my intent, the personal intent of the original person or the team owning this mission briefing. You have the key implied tasks, outlining what roughly needs to be done. And you have a section where you define explicitly what shouldn't be done. And in order to make this a bit more practical, I defined a very small case study here and want to walk you through some example bullet points of how to fill these sections of the mission briefing in the respective scenario I've developed. So the scenario we're going to briefly walk through the mission briefing is that we are a team, we work at an e-commerce company with our own shop. But as far as platform economies go, we want to extend our catalog of products to other platforms which dominate the market, whether it's Amazon or whether it's eBay. So, and we take the role as the product manager here, and we want to align our whole team on this new idea. So we spent probably half a day on defining this collaborative mission briefing. After I walked you through these chapters, I also have some tips of how to conduct like such a mission briefing workshop. But let's look at the content first to give you a sense of what you might put in this mission briefing, which is usually limited to one pager. So on the first level of the context, it's all about setting the stage, right? So it's about making people understand why you're doing that. So this usually includes two perspectives. The first is what's going on within your company, like totally objectively what's going on. Then what's going on the market, like inside-outside perspective, and then defining a trigger, right? So what's triggering us to change something about the situation we just described. And in our context, we have a solid year-over-year revenue, but the growth is slowing. We're at 10%, previously 15%, now we're at 3%. We see the market trend coming up that people are selling stuff on Amazon and eBay as well compared to other shops. And we know this is the complication here. The trigger is that manually adding our product catalog to these other platforms would include like 900 man days, which is totally ridiculous to a company to spend effort on. So there's some questions you should consider in writing the context here. It's like, are there any recent or emerging changes, and what has been the main focus of this unit of the team so far? So next up, we're going to look at the higher intent, and this is something you would have to collect before starting to craft the mission briefing with the team, because this basically outlines the perspective of the overall company, right? So it's about ensuring that your particular initiative is in line with the overall company big picture. And in here, I just collected a quote from our imaginary CEO who said, "Always be where our customers are is the leading principle for our product development efforts to achieve our company goal of double-digit year-over-year revenue growth." So you notice in here, it's like it's a qualitative, inspiring thing as well. Always be where our customers are, but it also is complemented by a hard number outlining the strategic growth initiative which is needed. So this essentially sets the purpose. Then coming back to my intent, and this needs to be phrased from the perspective of the team which is working on that. So what we really do, and I think Bungai called out a Spice Girls song where he, at the quote, like, what I really want. I can't get this out of my head, unfortunately. So we as a team want to automatically make our inventory and shopping platforms available without additional cost. So we can participate in the platform economy trend. And the goal is, and this is important, to also add a hard metric in here, that we want to generate $500,000 of revenue from purchases from eBay and Amazon within the first 6 months after launch. So again, you define something qualitative, inspiring on the top level, and complement it with something quantitative to be able to check the results. Key implied tasks. The biggest mistake I see teams make here is to really like write down granular what needs to be done. Instead, it's about just outlining the most critical parts which needs to be considered. So in our case, it would be understand the limitations and similarities of Amazon eBay APIs, and we need to identify the most desired categories. And it could be continued with more specific product tasks. So what you notice here is a theme that it's really about giving teams the freedom to react to the learnings they make along the way to redefine their specific day-to-day tasks they need to complete to achieve that. And last but not least, it's about defining the boundaries here. So it's, as a team, we want to also define what we're explicitly not going to do or which side effects are not allowed as a result of our project. One example could be, in our case, that prices of our items on Amazon and eBay are not allowed to be more than 5% cheaper in our own shop. So we don't want to cannibalize sales. And we won't deliver items to Rakuten or Wish, which are other e-commerce platforms, as part of this initiative. So it's, again, explicitly defining, getting everybody in the team and also for upper management, because this is a great tool for not only aligning laterally, but also towards other executive levels on board what we're doing and also what we're not going to do. As I said in the beginning, so I have quite a nice format which worked for me perfectly when I try to encourage teams to use this framework. So you, as one of the lateral leader of the team, you should get input for the blocks like the higher intent from upper management. You like get a feeling for the strategic outline you're headed. Then you have to should assemble your whole cross-functional team, again, whether it's marketing or product development, for at least 4 hours. I recommend 4 hours at the least. And then you go through every of those 5 sections of the mission briefing collaboratively using design thinking methods, right? So everybody puts up like 20 stickies, then you diverge again, you reselect, you prioritize stickies until you all agree on the content of one section. And agreement is actually the last advice I want to give for this framework, is that people oftentimes mistake alignment with agreement. And this refers to all the alignment levels I showed you in the beginning. Alignment doesn't mean everybody is happy and can't stop clapping. It's about committing to a certain way forward without questioning it again and again every day. So again, alignment is not agreement. It's more about commitment and getting buy-in from everybody. So to sum it up, lateral leaders may oftentimes lack the safety net, which you can experience as a hierarchical leader. Again, relying on classic hierarchical tools like performance improvements plan, or simply firing people, which may feel uncertain or insecure for lateral leaders sometimes, especially when having to deal with very experienced domain experts. But in the end, if you pay attention to empathy for the domain peers you're working with, and also focusing on all the alignment levels at all the time, you can really make a significant difference for the team you're working with, nevertheless, even without lacking those hierarchical tools. And frankly speaking, I oftentimes hear people, especially individual product managers, being kind of a bit relieved when they say, okay, I don't have to deal with those hierarchical tools. I much rather rely on lateral leadership tools to get my team on board, because you just have a completely different relationship with the peers you're working with without this constant fear of like having a boss discussion going on. Yeah, and that's pretty much it, what I wanted to share. I hope I was able to circle back to the promised key takeaways here, and I'm super happy to jump into Q&A from now on.
Tim, thanks so much. That was great. Good stuff in there, folks. If you've got any questions for Tim, just drop them in the chat, please, the chat window, and I will ask Tim the questions as they come up. I've got a few. I was taking some notes while you were presenting, Tim, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. And again, folks, I encourage you to put your thoughts and questions into the chat. Tim, who writes the mission briefing, and how much effort should go into it?
Sorry, I missed the first part audio-wise. Could you please repeat?
Who writes the mission briefing, and how much effort should go into it?
Yeah. So what the goal is to align the whole team. So essentially, if you say who writes the final version, it's like, I would say it should be at least a mirror of the mindset of the whole team. So everybody should get its chance to be involved. Of course, the format I suggested of doing this collaborative workshop is quite exhausting. What people do is, for example, remote teams, they do it in an asynchronous way. So usually the product manager, in the case of a product team, starts to draft an outline, because this person is most closest to the strategic alignment stakeholders. So they do an outline, and then they share it with the team, and it's just an iterative chit chat. And then we say, okay, please everybody add your comments, for example, in a Google Doc or a Mural file over the course of the next week. Then we meet back again, debate, and reprioritize. So, so essentially, oftentimes management puts the final responsibility to the product manager or the lateral leader of a team. So this is important to emphasize, to have in mind when you submit it to upper management, that's falling back to you. But in order to get the buy-in down the road, when you start building the product, it's important that you have all the perspectives of the teams considered in there and have the buy-in. Regards to time, I would say, so again, the workshop, I think a workshop can be done in 4 hours. I much rather would say plan for the whole day, make it a team activity. Therefore, you're much more relaxed to do it. And again, I also recommend if you do it asynchronously, don't try to let this phase of writing the mission briefing to drag along too much. But so I would say from start to finish, try to get it done in 2 weeks to have a draft to submit for approval, or like pin it up in your team space.
Does the mission briefing replace any other work or deliverable or thing that we're working on? It feels like it's it could be a lot of work if you're trying to convince people of a significant initiative.
Yeah, that's totally true. I think it really depends on how mature your organization is. So what I oftentimes encountered is that less mature organizations are not willing to commit on a project based on the content of a mission briefing, because it's so vague, right? Deliberately, it leaves up a lot of space for the teams to execute against. So less mature organizations are oftentimes not willing. They say, okay, this is like this is how you pitch the ideas to the CEO over lunch, but in order to get funding for it, you have to be much more granular. But the more mature organization is, and for example, we at Iridium do it like, for us, it basically replaced the epic, like the quarterly initiative planning, what we're going to do. It's just that, okay, let's do a mission briefing and then let's go from there, and the team will figure it out along the way.
Got it, good. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the statement that alignment is not agreement? Can you kind of expand on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I can start this elaboration with a great quote or a great story I recently read, because most of you are probably aware of these famous Amazon shareholder letters from Jeff Bezos, and he I think it was the 2016 one, where he said he told a story of like, okay, I think in the past he was kind of a micromanager, especially with this Firephone project. I think he really took his learnings from that. And for example, when the Amazon Prime Video team pitched some ideas for the next originals to him, he was disagreeing with them on the first round and said, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's see if you find something better. They came back still with the same suggestion. He was like, okay, I personally am still not convinced that this is the best idea you can come up with, but I'm committing to this path with your suggested version nevertheless. So what I said is like, or the biggest difference is that people try to do so many rounds with those mission briefings until they're really like completely, like, can't come up with the English word, but everybody agrees, you have buy-in from everybody. It's like everybody is happy and feels considered, which means like you probably have a 15 pages document and not a one-pager, because you can't keep it concise and everybody puts his bullet points in there. And therefore it's only about, don't try to make everybody happy, but just get them to just this point where they say, okay, I'm committing to this, and let's continue the discussion along the way. So it's really maybe even go with the unhappiness, or with like a certain grudge someone may have, but it's still more important to get their buy-in of like, hey, okay, I'm committing the resources you're asking for, or I'm not blocking you in any way. Let's move forward. So I'm signing basically this mission briefing.
Got it. Yes. So we're clear on where we're going. We're clear on why we're going there. Everyone's pulling in the same direction, but I may not agree that that's the best direction. Yeah. Basically. Okay. Got it. No, that's clear. That's totally clear, and that's great. I'm going to ask you this next question. I don't know what these other terms are, so I hope that you do. It says the question is, how do you frame lateral leadership against participative leadership or cooperative leadership?
Okay, it's interesting. I haven't heard from these two terms either, but maybe one framework I like to compare lateral leadership towards is servant leadership. So maybe it's incorporated in one of these two terms, at least I hope so. So maybe I can briefly explain the context of servant leadership, which is essentially saying you as the leader need to put yourself last, like eat last at lunch, for example, put your needs last. And servant leadership also essentially glorifies all the other people around you. And I have a certain grudge with this one, because I think at first, if you are the one owning, for example, the product vision or owning any other vision as the lateral leader of a team, I don't think that you can put yourself last, because otherwise you start to become invisible and it's hard to maintain this ownership of the vision. And the second thing is that I'm convinced that you should much rather focus on the individual needs and motivators of the people and question these as well, instead of just glorifying all the other people around you, because the individual needs of your peers might not be exactly the best side of them as well. So I personally think that there was an attempt to set servant leadership up as the way product managers should lead agile teams a couple of years ago. But I think it doesn't suit the job.
Interesting, yeah, because servant leadership is a big agile thing, right? I mean, it's kind of like, you hear it over and over again in a lot of the sort of the agile leadership courses. So it's an interesting point of view to push against that. I like it. It's an interesting question here, because I don't think it pertains to lateral leadership, but it speaks of much bigger problems. So the question is, can lateral leadership be successful in a culture where individuals lack accountability? And then if so, how do you change the culture to adopt these practices?
Okay, interesting. In general, I would say Regarding the first part of the question, yes, I think it can be done because usually accountability refers to accountability towards upper management and hierarchical management. So I still think if you find a group of peers to work with, whether it's officially organized or you're implicitly organizing it, I think you can still figure out a way to collaborate with each other in a lateral way and still have on this other part of your job, which is not being organized in this team, still like completely rely on this hierarchical leadership from above, so to say. So I think it's possible, but it really requires more intelligence from the swarm organization, like from the people who have to act themselves and like have to form those small independent collectives themselves, because upper management won't require them. And regarding the second part, I mean, obviously this is like a big organizational change question here. I think one success story I always see is that if people start to organize things themselves, it's much easier to create a success story, which you could then present to upper management and to other management colleagues, and then thereby like slowly repeating this pattern. Maybe more teams are formed this way. You organized yourselves, and then therefore maybe you can eventually break up this hierarchical organization. But I really think, like, to sum it up, yes, I think you can organize yourself laterally if you form a new team constellation. And by repeating this, hopefully a successful setup, I think you can create organizational change.
Got it. Great. So we touched on this a little bit about alignment and agreement. You gave a good answer there. I liked it. Do you see any challenges with getting the support of your teammates if they're just aligned but not in agreement with you? And then what can you do to if you're seeing somebody saying, "Look, I understand where you're going. I disagree with it, and I've resigned to do what you say," right? But how do you get the best work out of people like that? Yeah,
it's glad you asked that, because this essentially refers to if you can recall, the alignment levels are outlined from macro to micro, and the micro level is really about thinking about the everyday struggles and everyday motivators of your team members, right? So one quote I usually try to raise is that people not only struggle at the beginning of a quarter or at the beginning of an initiative where you do the strategic alignment, they struggle every day with their individual drivers. And therefore, it's like, whether it's, okay, I lack organizational flexibility, or my ethical standards are not met. And therefore, it's important for you, even as a lateral leader, because oftentimes people perceive that as being a people manager job of like working with the individual needs of this person. You have to pay attention to what's driving this individual person, because in order to get their buy-in for the day-to-day success, which you eventually need to implement this bigger vision or this strategic alignment, you need to pay attention to that. And some great tools which could help here is to create some informal roles in your team which match the individual motivators of this person. So you could say, okay, we need a team spokesperson, we need a team facilitator, a time boxer, or a janitor. By creating those informal roles, which a people manager will never do, you can say, you can demonstrate, again, it's back to empathy. You can demonstrate the empathy towards this person. Say, like, look, let's find the spot which suits your needs on the day-to-day basis, going beyond the pure thing we're building.
Got it. That's really great, right? Look for the things that people are particularly good at, amplify those things, and get them to contribute in the best way that they can, even if they're not fully bought into this. Look, lateral leadership. We even call this presentation, how to lead Agile teams when you're not the boss. Is this way of working, or is this leadership or tactic for individual contributors only, or do managers use this as well?
Yeah, I think so. It's basically going back to this thing of like traditional organizations only having those small agile Gallic villages. And eventually this will expand beyond that. So it's not only expanding to other lateral leadership team constellations, but if you go back, if you can recall this brief check I did in the beginning of whose vacation days are you approving, even many of the managers, VPs, even C-level people will recognize their relationships with peers on eye level, right? So you're not approving the vacation days of other VPs around you and other C-level board members as well. So this is why I think that therefore there's probably the biggest shift, because I think individual contributors can adapt to this leadership style much more quickly than VPs or C-levels, which are used to this strong hierarchical relationship thing. So they have to accept that they need to apply lateral tools in their day-to-day business as well in order to succeed if they want to create alignment on VP level, director level, or even C level. So it's really expanding not only to other areas of the company, but also to other hierarchical levels of the company.
Yeah, look, it makes sense, right? Until you're the CEO, you've always got to lead laterally at some point or another, right? So that makes a lot of sense. Similar kind of question, different kind of facet on that. So, is this a thing for large companies only? Does it work in startups, any company? And is there a difference in the way that you would practice lateral leadership in a startup versus a big company?
Yeah. So I think it definitely can and needs to work in both ways, in both organizational types, because especially in the startup style, I think startups oftentimes fear the introduction of formal processes and formal relationships and formal hierarchies until it's probably too late.
Yeah.
They're too big. So essentially, I think lateral leadership is even more important in startup environments, especially the empathy factor. You really, this comes back to like when you decide whom to assemble for your founding team, who are your first hires. So it needs to be present in there as well, because otherwise you have a dysfunctional organization even right from the beginning. But I think so essentially it kind of reversed depending on your organizational type. So I think the startups are much more focused or need to focus on the micro alignment thing, on the day-to-day motivators and drivers, because they're a small team. It's usually easy to keep this small team aligned on the strategic level all the way. Compared to a bigger company organization, they have to pay much more attention to the strategic alignment on the top of the funnel, because this is the bigger issue for larger organizations. And on the micro level, it's really, it comes like a second or third step even. So this is what I think the difference is. Also answering this part of the question, that in startup environments, much more coming from the one-to-one directions on the empathy level, and on corporates, I think you should definitely start on the strategic alignment in order to get the buy-in, get the commitment from the other departments and resources, so that you then can focus on the individual drivers in the day-to-day business as a next step.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense, which is great. So another question for you, and there's a few more good ones in the chat, and I've written a few as well here. So look, this is a thing that works well in corporate or even national cultures that allow this to happen, right? How does this work in a hierarchical company or a hierarchical culture, right? So if there's a national culture, like, where questioning the boss or trying to, lead laterally could be perceived as insubordination, right? Yeah. How does this work in a hierarchical company or culture?
Yeah, I think especially two prominent examples for everybody, especially on the cultural levels, like for example, Japan or even Germany as well. So very hierarchical focused countries. Yeah. So one thing, and this circles back to the point where I said Agile doesn't have a brain. So what I observe in these companies or in these cultures is like, oftentimes when leaders or CEOs approve the introduction of Agile, for example, they just approve a way of getting software shipped faster in their heads. They don't acknowledge that it also needs to change the way people interact with each other and work with each other. So at first they only get Agile into their home. It's like, okay, no, you can build software faster, right? Mm-hmm. And then slowly, maybe even teams, this is also what comes back to organizational maturity. I think the less mature an organization is, they are looking for strong guidance coming from Agile frameworks like Scrum or Kanban, and they really closely follow by the book. And then at some point in time, when they are maturing, and this is all about agility, maturing agility in organizations, they recognize, hey, look, this way of interacting with each other, which we need to do to excel even further, is A, not properly defined in those Agile constellations, and B, the original ways of interacting with each other do no longer work. So we need to figure out new ways. And then I think it's a pretty organic process to come to the smaller, self-organized teams which work Agile, still applying methodologies like a Kanban board and whatever, all the specifics of those frameworks. But then they figure out, okay, let's exclude the boss from even more discussions. Let's exclude the hierarchy and operate at even more eye level. So it starts with a strong focus on the process provided by Agile frameworks. And this is also an easy entry because this one CEOs approve, and then over time, everybody eventually has to recognize that the way people collaborate also needs to change in order to accelerate Agile even further.
Fair, but I mean, it's going to be difficult for people to let go of that control, right? And particularly in a hierarchical culture, to let go and share that with their subordinates and say, no, go ahead, lead others around you when they're the people that I should be leading, right? So I feel like that's going to be an interesting one no matter what.
Yeah, especially next to cultural, it's also a generational thing, right? So I think like what I see companies going through those aging cycle of like 70 plus white man, no offense to anybody here, like being on the boards, like eventually they will transition out of their jobs, and then like more junior, like today junior people or like more modern thinking executives will make their way to the top, and they don't have any problem with like being people, letting teams work themselves and being self-organized. So this is eventually a transition which will support this trend as well.
Got it. Bouncing back to your conversation about empathy before, one of the questions in the chat is, look, it says empathy seems like a natural trait for people. Some are more empathetic than others, though. Some are not, right? Can it be learned, taught? If so, how? Can it become a part of culture, right? So if I, as a designer or a developer, needs to develop empathy for my colleagues, but it doesn't come naturally to me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How can it be learned, taught, and how does it become a part of the culture?
Yeah. So I think the pure skill of like you being an empathetic person is of course like something which really needs to be dealt on a more coaching level thing. But the tips I outlined really help you, like force you into professional empathy. So really stepping into the shoes of your peers is a great way of doing that. So for example, a lot of companies which are successful and very customer centric say, the second you join our company, you spend 1 week on customer care, right? Or I see companies where everybody rotates on customer care or customer support as a team as well, in order to not only be closer to the customer, but also to appreciate the work of these peers even more. And I think this is a great example, a great way emphasizing this one. This is also what I meant with join your internal communities of practice, right? So when I was at Zing, I had a mobile team at last, and they have a strong internal iOS community. And I was always wondering or hearing in the stand-ups about certain blockers or things they are working on. I was like, okay. And they just said it came out of the community. And I was like, okay, what's this community? I need to go there. And then I showed up as the sole PM in this room full of iOS devs. And eventually they stopped complaining about the product managers, of course. But it was good for me to get a sense of like, what are the topics they're debating? What are the trends, the things they are chasing? So I really encourage everybody. I think these internal communities of practice are a great way of doing that. Also making, taking over the role or shadowing a peer, a domain expert peer from your team, a mandatory thing is a great way of fostering and bringing it more into a cultural way, right? So saying, okay, go to design meetings with your designer, but sit silent in the corner and try to like step out of your PM shoes and just like build up recognition for the pains they're going through, right? Because like designer is not from a distance, not only always pushing pixels or for a developer pushing code. It's really a lot of stuff is going on behind the scenes, and you need to be aware of that to put the behavior of your peers into context. So to sum it up, like really make shadowing or even like taking fully over the job if you have some talents, a mandatory thing, especially in new agile teams, you can do that. And company-wide, I would really say, I think this customer support thing is a perfect example of saying, look, you come on board, 1 week customer support, no questions asked, and then we can start talking about your normal role.
Is creating a community of practice essentially an act of lateral leadership?
One could say so. I think one guy I used to know in a previous company, he started this internal community after he became something like a lead developer for a central team, but without formal hierarchy. So yeah, it's actually interesting that you point this out. I think people oftentimes trying to start communities of practice are looking for more leadership, a stronger leadership role, but by not getting it in a formal way, they maybe start this community, and as the starter of this community, they are like perceived as the leader of this community. Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Okay. Well, come on. One question just came in now. So back to mission briefing again. Would you recommend establishing a time horizon for it and reviewing it periodically?
Yeah.
Because it feels like a good way to facilitate agreement and disagreement.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it refers to like which time frame the mission briefing needs to look at, right? If I got it correctly, I think this is what it's meaning. So a general rule of thumb. So again, we use it because I don't believe in planning certainty for longer than 3 months.
Yeah.
So I say, okay, but I say don't do it below 3 months, because otherwise it seems like a wasted effort. Like everything below 3 months, I think can be done hands-on with the team without like too much tension or friction. So I recommend not below 3 months, but also definitely don't go beyond 12 months. So like try to keep it between 3 and 12. Obviously, management then has to accept that if you try to. So I know companies which base their yearly project pitch process on the mission briefing. But of course, if you do that, you have to live with much more uncertainty. And oftentimes the pitching for those initiatives is done in September. And then when the teams get going on January on an approved initiative, they of course have to revisit the mission briefing to like check, okay, what did we learn in the meantime? What has changed? Do we get the buy-in? Do we have resources? And then reconnect it. And maybe you even start writing sub-mission briefings for particular feature initiatives within your bigger thing if you do this yearly perspective. But again, for me, yearly planning or yearly mission briefings feel super unnatural. If you have a yearly project, you should probably break it down from my perspective, or limit your horizon and accept the uncertainty beyond that.
Got it. And is there a relation between mission briefing and OKRs? Is there a connection there?
Yeah. So how we do it is that our process is that we do our quarterly OKRs. From that, so strategy mission at the very top, of course. Then we have quarterly OKRs, and then from the OKRs we define the mission briefing for the specific initiatives we're going to tackle. So again, it's kind of a similar pattern. Like in the OKRs, of course, I'm sure Felipe talked about that in previous webinar as well. The goal is to not be like outline specific tasks in your OKRs, but really give teams the freedom to hit a certain goal. And you kind of like have to take that to one more granular level when you do the mission briefing for the specific initiative you're going to pursue to achieve your OKRs. So yeah, you can perfectly tie them together from my perspective.
Excellent. Last question. Is this an Agile tool, like specifically? Right?
I mean, it definitely has its, let's say, it has its roots in Agile. As I said, I think Agile team constellations provide the foundation for like lateral leadership.
Yeah.
But if you look at more traditional organized organizations which do waterfall stylus development, you also encounter project teams, how you used to say that old school wise, where nobody has a formal authority towards each other, and they need to organize their way of working as well. They just have to rely on other frameworks to organize the process perspective of their collaboration. But in terms of using a mission briefing, for example, you might hit some roadblocks with the uncertainty in a waterfall approach. But in general, it has its root in Agile. It's not limited to Agile. It can definitely be applied in other organizational environments, and I would argue that it maybe can even help you turn your traditional organization into a more agile thinking organization.
Tim Herbig, thanks so much for your time, for the great ideas and the tips and tricks today. Super helpful. Folks, thanks so much for listening and for asking great questions today. I think Tim provided a lot of great advice in there. Tim's book, Lateral Leadership, comes out later this year. Somebody texted me and said that the short URL on the screen is not working. I'll fix that later. So if you want to go to Sense and Respond Press, senseandrespondpress.com, you can sign up to find out when Tim's book is coming out. We've recorded this webinar and we will publish it shortly. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or directly to Tim. And thanks again for spending an hour with us. And we'll see you all next month. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.